talking about the full moon in Aries on Friday, November the 3rd. This brings the self-will and aggression of Aries in contrast to the compromise and gentle nature of Libra. It's in Bharani Nakshatra, which is ruled by Lord Yama, the god of restraint. There's a powerful Mars aspect which could bring a lot of arguing, and also a powerful Jupiter aspect which could conflate things a little bit. So check it out. Talking about the full moon in Aries that will happen on Friday, November 3rd, late in the evening here in the United States. Universal time, it's actually on the 4th. So that's when the actual Purnima, or the actual full moon, comes together, when the moon is exactly opposite the sun. So we'll experience a lot of the full moon in the West on Friday. That'll be the full moon day. So this full moon will happen in Aries. Now, of course, this is the opposition point of the Libra cycle that started a couple weeks earlier. People focus a lot on the full moon, and they don't pay much attention to the new moon, because the new moon is the beginning of the cycle. And the full moon is when we see the moon in the sky, and it's the halfway point, which brings a point of harmony and contrast to the cycle. So we're in the Libra cycle now, which is about trying to compromise. It's literally where we try to yield to another, try to find equality in our relations, not just romantic, but with other adults, where there's no hierarchy. So it's not like a parent and a child, or a boss and an employee, or it's two equals. And it's not even just two friends. It's two equals who are engaged, where there's a hook involved, where there's some connection. Because many times, even like with your friends, which have more to do with the third house, you can get into a battle with your friend, but at any time you can leave. And of course you can leave in a Libra type of interaction as well, but it's harder because there's a hook there. Like a romantic partnership, it's not so easy to leave, right? Or any other kind of relationship where there's a mutual desire trying to be fulfilled with the other person. Like with your friends, usually there isn't. Like, just with friends, there's, you may have the same interests, and you're kind of hanging out in the same way, and you find a sort of common interests. But it's different than Libra, where those interests become an alliance that you're now sort of engaged with and working with. For instance, like with your friends, you have friends in different situations. By the way, again, it's related to the third house, where like you hang out with your friend when you want to play basketball, but maybe your friend doesn't like to, shoot pool, or like they don't drink or something. So you share that activity with them, and you hang out with them when you want to play, basketball, and then when you go drink, you have other friends or whatever, right? So these kind of sort of alliances, or these situations form through the third house. But the Libra principle, and it's also related to the sign of Gemini, where you have different friends and different interests. But Libra is where, let's say like with your romantic partner, notice what happens in a romantic partnership. You have certain interests that you share with the person, and then other ones that you don't. And those ones that you don't can become points of stress and tension and jealousy, and you try to make that interest part of your interest as well in the Libra area of life. You see the difference? So Libra is all of those kinds of relationships. Romantic ones, business ones, where we try to fit that thing into our life. Right? And romantic relationships and other kinds of partnerships will break down at these points where you don't converge. You obviously have points of convergence, but it's like the example that I used before. If you got into a business partnership, let's say with someone around, let's say sports, let's like use the same, example. But again, you drink and they don't drink. Let's say and some of the, but you decide to have a business with them that includes the thing that you share in common. Now it's not just a friend, now that's an alliance. Where you get along, that'll be strengthened. Where you don't, it's going to create tension. And depending on whether there's more confluence or tension, depends on how well that alliance can stay together. So this is what Libra is. It's literally the desire to want to try to accommodate that and try to fit that into our life. And of course, we notice this a lot more in any other, context. In a romantic relationship, that's really the sort of currency that we're burning, or that's like the currency that we're spending, right? But literally, the full moon in Aries is the opposite point, where we try to find all these ways that we mesh. But then Aries is, the opposite point of that is where we say, no, I've tried and I can't do it. I've tried to accommodate, but this is just against my principle or my this or that, or maybe just you personally, I just don't like you, which is often what it comes down to. It's not always interests, of course. It's often, attitudes, or philosophies, or whatever. You're trying to go into business with the person. It doesn't matter that you drink and they don't drink. It's just, but they always want to be the one in charge and they don't listen, or they're a pain in the neck, or they're sort of passive aggressive, or whatever. It's some kind of attitude that you're trying to deal with, but it doesn't work. So again, Aries is the opposite point of Libra, which is about individuality, individual distinction, where we draw the line in the sand around some behavior or some attitude. And again, the full moon is the opposition point of the Libra cycle. It's the opposite point. And they appear opposite, but they're actually shadows or two sides of the same coin. You can use the romantic relationship, for example. We don't really have a strong relationship unless it's two healthy individuals with healthy boundaries and healthy egos. The shadow or the problem of the Libra cycle is, again, compromising too much and then snapping back really strong in the Aries part of the cycle. We don't do any favors to anyone if we compromise on things we shouldn't have compromised on and then bludgeon them to death after we've compromised, acting like it was their fault. It's no one's fault if you're sliding on your principles. I'm shaking my finger at you. No, it's no one's fault but your own if you're compromising on things that you should be steadfast in. It's your job, and only your job, to have good boundaries, to have clarity of purpose, and to know where those no compromise zones are. I can compromise on this, but I'm not compromising on that. Like for me, one of the no compromise zones with people in general is drinking, or any kind of intoxicants or drug use, or I drank. It's not a judgment. It's just I just don't want to be around it anymore. And again, it's not a judgment. It's not like I think they're bad people. It's just I don't want to be around people who are doing that anymore. Again, it might sound judgmental. It's not. It's just that seeing someone impaired and trying to deal with someone who is impaired a little bit, certainly in a romantic sense, I wouldn't do that with a partner. I wouldn't want to be with a partner. But even as friends or socially, I just don't want to be in the environment anymore. I played in bands where I played in nightclubs for 15 years around people drunk. And many times I was one of them. Yeah, but after a while, that's just it's a simple no compromise zone. And we have to be very clear about what those things are. So Aries, the full moon in Aries, is where those things can blow up. So notice how I'm talking about this full moon in context with the new moon. the origin of the cycle. And I'm just going to say this, and it's a mistake. It's a huge mistake. You'll see people do this all the time, where it's like, it's the full moon, it's a great day to start something. It's a great day to start, like, let's say the full moon in Aries. It's a great day to start a new workout thing, as if the full moon is the start of a cycle. And I'm sorry to say this, but I see it more in Western astrology, or in just astrologers who don't really know what they're talking about as far as they don't understand the cycles. The cycle begins at the new moon. The full moon is the halfway point. So just remember that. And it doesn't mean it isn't a good day to start something, but it's not because of that lunation cycle. And by the way, I don't think it's a good day to start things often. It's usually not, because again, it's the beginning of the waning cycle. And the waning part of the cycle is the letting go part of the cycle. You can even look at the new moon is like the inhale, and the full moon is the beginning of the exhale. It's like, whew, okay, we're getting filled with this. And then at the full moon, we start to now integrate the opposite. And part of integrating the opposite is letting go of the polarity around both extremes. So we tend to be extreme. And this is why lunation cycles, new moons and full moons, are extremes. That's why full moons, we can be very extreme. And the extreme, however, and it's the extreme Aries. The psychological extreme of Aries is in contrast to the extreme of Libra. So it's not as if the concepts aren't true, but we have to understand why the concept is true. And new moons and full moons bring out a lot of these, you know, these polarities and these splits and these, you know, shadows and like all of this polarity. Again, of course, Libra, Aries is big polarity. Masculine, feminine, compromise, assertion. So notice this. And again, even the day or two before, we start to feel it. And especially in this case on Thursday, half of the way through Thursday, November 2nd, is when the moon actually goes into Aries. So we start to really feel that quality of the full moon once the moon actually enters that sign. So literally, middle of the day Thursday, all day Friday, you could really feel that Aries assertion. Be careful of that snapback about, that's it, I've had it, I'm always the one giving in and blah blah. Realize that you might be giving in before anyone even asked you to give in. Many times people don't even ask us to give in, they're just living their life, and we're the one going through the process. Okay, I'll try, okay, I'll try. And we just do it. They didn't ask us to do it, we just did it. And if we had healthier boundaries, we would say in the moment, you know what, I don't really want to do that. I don't really feel comfortable with that. You know, like, I don't really feel comfortable with you drinking. You know, I just have to say. Let's say like we start dating someone, and sometimes maybe they'll just say, oh, all right, and then they won't drink around you. And then maybe it'll even get them to reflect, and they'll stop, maybe of their own accord. But it also brings up for them their issues, because they might be stopping just to please you. This is why relationships are so difficult, especially at the beginning. One of the main things to look out for in relationships is not how nice the person seems to be, but whether or not they're being authentic. I tell you, and you know, after years you see this. After years of being alive, you start to realize, to me, the biggest flags that go up around people, it's not just relationships, but it's the phoniness. When I see phony smiles and oh, or any kind of projections and oh, you're so this or that, or oh, hi, and people like, I'm just like, I don't trust it, because I know it's not real. I know it's not true. The person's trying to make me happy, trying to please me, trying to do this. It's like, don't try. I don't want you to try. I want you to be real. Because I already know that kind of Libra scale, I'm trying so hard, is going to eventually swing back to the I'm not doing anything now. I tried so hard and you didn't appreciate any of it and right? So you get the idea. This is what we need to be careful of with the Libra Aries insanity, really. There's a crazy, and not just Libra Aries, by the way. All of the signs have a kind of crazy polarity that goes on, but this is the Libra Aries one. So the full moon, we could see that Aries snapback insanity, furious kind of tantrum explosiveness. And we could see it starting Thursday once the moon goes into Aries. So a few other things about this, and it makes it explosive, is Mars is aspecting from Virgo. Now, Mars casts an eight house aspect. 8 houses forward, 4 houses forward, and 8 houses forward. So in particular, Mars is given that one-way aspect onto the moon in Aries, right? Because Virgo aspects Aries, Mars is at 13 degrees, almost 14 degrees, and the full moon happens at 17 degrees. So especially that full moon day, especially Friday, watch it. Watch for some tantrums. Watch for some public tantrums on Friday. Watch for our president to have a Twitter tantrum on Friday. You watch. Watch something blow up. Because he was born on a full moon, and his lunation cycles are pretty intense. So I almost guarantee this prediction. Friday, Twitter tantrum blow up, President of the United States. Mark it down. Write it down. Especially with Mars putting a one-way aspect onto that full moon in Aries. Oh boy. And other aspects, Venus and Jupiter, are also aspecting. Jupiter is a pretty close opposition aspect as well from Libra. So again, that can definitely bring some sense of justice and purpose, but also just kind of blow things up a little bit. And, you know, what happens when Jupiter influences something and there's other negative aspects or negative potentials, like the full moon where we're really full of it, and it's Aries, which is really fiery, and there's an aspect from Mars, which is like ready to win. What Jupiter can often do, especially if he's not in good dignity, which he's not in Libra, now he's in great enemy dignity, is Jupiter can just bring this justification. And it doesn't just make things bigger. Again, that's a very convoluted kind of amateur explanation that you hear. Jupiter makes things bigger. Yeah, he does, but why? What's making it big? What it is this big justification, this big, like, you know, I'm justified because of this big philosophy. You know, like let's say in the case of like someone getting upset at their partner, then it's this big story that comes out that you could never unravel or explain, or some big concept, you know, rather than just dealing with the fact that, you know, I'm just pissed. It's no, it's not just this. It's because of this big idea, that this big philosophy that we dress some argument up in. And again, this is the problem of Jupiter, is it's big and it makes things bigger than than the interpersonal relationship. This is why Jupiter can be disruptive and problematic in interpersonal relationships, especially when you're trying to communicate, which is Mercury and Venus. And Mercury and Venus are very much just about the details and not blowing things up. Jupiter does tend to blow things up, but what you recognize when there's a Jupiter influence is this big philosophy, which you can't work through this big philosophy in a conversation like that. Well, it's the principle of the thing that you always and it's because your mother or your religion or your this, and it's like, you know what? Let's talk about this here. Your words, my words. That's how we are supposed to relate with two equals. So Jupiter's influence is often conflating things around this big philosophy. Jupiter's also combust now. It's getting burned up by the sun. So we're purifying a lot of that Jupiter energy so that there can be a real kind of disappointment. This is another quality of Jupiter's influence. Again, Jupiter makes things big because how we see its influence in relationships often is we want the relationship to be this big thing that gives us hope, that gives us purpose, that gives us vision. as I've said before, our relationship in and of itself is never going to provide that. It shouldn't. We need to, that's provided by things like children, which can hold a relationship together, or gurus, spiritual teachings, bigger things. That's what Jupiter needs to be focused on. But instead we get this kind of romance fantasy delusion, especially when Jupiter's in Libra, and then where we go from there is just we just get disappointed, and the partner disappoints us. And we're disappointed with the partner. Here I thought you were going to be this, and you acted like this before. You acted so nice, and sure, you used to be like this, but now you're like this, and I'm so disappointed. So people who have a strong Jupiter-Venus connection, like even in their natal chart, or things like that, they can deal with a lot of that. That kind of romance, fantasy projection, that leads to disappointment. So again, we could see a lot of this when the moon goes into Aries, especially Thursday, Friday. Now, the nakshatra of this full moon is Bharani. Bharani nakshatra is related to Lord Yama. And Yamaraj is the god of restraints and of consequences, is the biggest word or concept that I put onto Lord Yama. Now, you know, he's sometimes called the god of death, or, you know, the one closely associated with death, and also closely associated with Saturn. He was actually Saturn's brother. But what happens is Yama shows up at the time of death. He's got a noose and he throws it around you and then takes you where you're supposed to go. So there's a quality of punishment with that, or at least feeling like we're being punished. But it's really that quality of Yama, like in a yogic sense, means restraint. It's a restraint. And again, life and consequences often feel like a restraint because we're ignorant. Because we associate ourselves with this limited existence. Because you think you're this separate ego, because you think you're this separate creature who was born and who has a history and a family, and you're right, and you have this thing, and everybody else needs to reckon with you, and you know, because all of this whole limited structure around which your life revolves, when the consequences, when you have to actually face the reality of your life, it often is not pleasant. I can't help but laugh, but that's me. I'm mean. I'm a mean man. No. What I'm saying is that when we have to actually really face the consequences and the truth of who we are and what the energy is that we put out, it often feels punishing. It feels like we're being punished. It feels like, why can't I do what I want to do? How come when I try something, it comes back painful? Why is the world painful? You know, that kind of thing. And again, none of those things are really true. They're all just a matter of perspective. But the way it feels often, and what we tend to do also in response, is we feel restrained, we feel somewhat punished, and so we have to be careful, but we tend to want to punish others who we think punished us. We can tend to have a vindictive streak. We can tend to want to even the score. We need to be careful of those kind of things in Bharani and in this full moon. It's the negative quality of this nakshatra, because it comes after Ashwini, which is about all of the energy and enthusiasm and passion to like do a lot of stuff. But then the next nakshatra, Bharani, says, yeah, but look at what this stuff has created. Look at what all these actions and all this energy has produced. It's produced a result, and that result is something that's limited. At the very least, even if you got what you want, now you have to manage it. And it's going to create a restraint on your life. Look at something even like a child. A child is a wonderful, beautiful thing, and it's a restraint. Once you have a child, you are restrained by the child. You can't just go out and party and drink and have fun anymore. There's a restraint. And that's something that you wanted. Right? So this is the nature of Bharani. This is also why Bharani, as you may know, is symbolized by the female reproductive tract, like the uterus or the vagina or the womb, because our existence and our life and our energy produces a tangible result. It actually creates something, and that's what your life is. Your life is a result of what you've done and the actions and the energies you've put forth, which is symbolized by Ashwini. And those things in your life itself is a restraint on your soul, even. Right? So it's a deep nakshatra in this regard, and at the end of life, Yama shows up, take you where you're supposed to go. He shows up to, and they say, you know, take you to hell and all that. It's not just hell, you know, but he's the Lord in those domains as well, in those domains that prepare you for the next life and to feel the consequences of your actions and stuff. So that nakshatra is really prevalent. So if you want to see how this is going to affect your sign, because this full moon is different for every sign. Like if you're a Cancer person, this is happening in your 10th house. If you're Capricorn, it's happening in your 4th house, full moon. If you're Pisces, it's happening in your 2nd house. You can do like many have done and continue to do and get my offer to join the Vedic Astrology Training Lab. Only 50 cents. You can try it for 2 weeks. When you join, you also get 8 hours of free classes. These were taught at conferences. People paid hundreds of dollars for these classes. And also a great chart reading template and other things, just because I like to teach people. So you can try it and not only get the forecast for your sign, but also 2 weeks of daily forecasts. Every day I publish a comprehensive forecast that talks about the Rashi of the moon, the Nakshatra, the Tithi, or the lunar day. The full moon is a lunar day or a Tithi. Also important aspects and other things. I've been doing this for more than 10 years. So you can try that for 2 weeks if you want. Either way, I hope you have a great full moon. Be careful getting triggered and blowing things up. Notice your projections, your disappointments, your habit to want to fixate and blame somebody else for it. Remember your part in it. Remember the compromises you made before you even let someone show up in a gracious manner. So don't blame people for you not holding your own boundaries. Also notice how much you're compromising and how much you need to just reclaim and, you know, become realistic about. So, take care.